You know, I always find it fascinating how obsessed people get about how much weight an actor loses for a role. And I always thought that was interesting because I know actors don't set out and go, I'm gonna lose this much weight and then talk about it and but I wonder, it's interesting because I read you lost 60 pounds in 9 weeks for the role, and I'm just curious.
No, I lost 35.
35, okay. So can you talk about
35, 40 maybe.
So at what point does that become unhealthy? And also how do you lose that weight and that quickly?
It's an interesting question about what point it becomes unhealthy. It certainly becomes an obsession very quickly. It requires an enormous amount of constant discipline. I think in the modern world, we're trained, you get hungry, you eat something immediately. So I'm almost 37. I was shot this when I was 35. So for 35 years, that had been the rhythm of my life. So to go against that was certainly a period of transition. So at what point it becomes an obsession is a great question. I really don't know. I certainly know that beyond having to do it for the film, reintegrating a normal pattern or rhythm of eating was very difficult after being so disciplined for 4 months about only existing on the bare minimum that I could. I mean, in terms of how you do it is really just starve oneself. But it's also what became interesting to observe was that we just eat entirely too much. I mean, I was starving myself and I was very hungry, but there was no point where I ever felt unhealthy. I just felt like I wasn't immediately satisfying myself the way we do in regular modern society. But I didn't feel like I never felt like I didn't have enough energy to get through the day or anything like that.
One thing I love about your performance, though, is as I'm watching it, I feel his struggle about being away from his family, but there's also that conflict of, I really want to find this city, this is my ambition, I need to get this done, this is my destiny. And I was reading a story that when you had left to go do this, you actually cut off communication between your girlfriend for 5 months, which I thought was interesting. And I'm wondering, again, with the weight loss question, how does that work? And does that become too much at a time as well? How do you know that you're not riding a balance there of like, this is too much for my work and not my personal life?
What became very apparent early on in this process was that this was the best opportunity I'd ever been given in my career, but also was going to require the most of me. And so I also fell in love and was in awe of the character that I was playing, who made this enormous amount of sacrifice. Where I went away for 4 months and had no communication with the outside world, he would go for 3 or 4 years. And so why I did that was that I was a bit nervous about the breadth of the emotional journey, and whatever one can do in a process to limit the amount of acting required, then it's always really helpful. And so a lot of the themes of this film were that conflict that one makes between bringing, pursuing one's dream and the inevitable conflict and sacrifice that requires in other elements of their life. And so I wanted to feel that loneliness. I wanted to feel selfish. And so it felt good and it had the required effect, and anytime I felt like it was a burden or a hardship, I was quickly brought back to reality in that it paled in comparison to what Fawcett himself went through.
Was the ending of Sons of Anarchy always the way it was in the show, or was there ever a different type of ending for that?
You know what? I don't know if there was, through the process of making that show, any ambiguity as to how it was going to end. Whether this was through conversations with Kurt or not, I can't remember, always assumed that Jax was going to sort of ride off into the sunset. And it wasn't until maybe the penultimate episode I ended up having the conversation, because I started to started to intuit that that's where Kurt was going to take it, and I asked him the question, and he said, "Yeah, I'm thinking you probably don't ride off onto the sunset." But also, Kurt is so specific in his writing and his storytelling and arcing out the show that I sort of can't believe that wasn't his intention all along. I just think he played his cards close to his chest.
Well, thank you, Charlie. I appreciate that.
Right on, dude.
Pleasure. I was reading a quote about how you mentioned technology nowadays and how you could tweet something and thousands of people will see it. But in this time period, obviously, that didn't exist. So I'm wondering, when you do a film like this, do you separate yourself from your technology during the day to feel like you're in that zone?
Well, we didn't really have a choice on this movie, you know. When you're in the jungle, there's no service whatsoever, you know. I think the only piece of technology I used while in the jungle was my iPod and headphones, because when I have to cry or something, I like to listen to music, and it helps me just focus on the task at hand. So the only real technology I used would have been that and a blender, you know. I used to blend and make smoothies, so they were the only two pieces of technology I really used in the jungle.
Do you mind if I ask you, like, what songs help you? Like, is it different for a movie, or do you use is it the same for a movie? Like, I mean,
I find if I listen to a song too much, my brain will go into like, oh, it's time to cry, and then I find it difficult to cry. So I have a few different songs. One is Win One for the Reaper, which is the theme song from Lost.
Oh, wow.
The Mission.
Michael Giacchino.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The Mission by Ennio Morricone. He has another one called Someone's Ode to Something.
I know what you're talking about.
I just have 3 songs on my iPod that I listen to, and they've all come from Bayona, from Making the Impossible, and they're a huge help. They're a huge help to me.
You know, this might be a ridiculous question, but I'm genuinely curious. And I was reading about the shooting scenarios with this and how there were bugs and spiders and insects, and like it was just a crazy shoot. I was reading a story about Charlie Hunnam's eardrum getting bitten, whatever. I know this might be a dumb question, but were you afraid of spiders at that point? I know you're playing Spider-Man, but I mean, was that something that was ever a thought process? And like, do you look at spiders differently now because of that role, or?
Dude, I hate spiders. I'm not gonna lie, I'm terrified of spiders. I'm fine with snakes and insects, but spiders is the no-go.
Me too.
No-go. We had a very terrifying experience on this movie. There's a type of spider called the banana spider, also known as the wandering spider, because it doesn't make a web, it just wanders around the ground. And it is the scariest looking thing you've ever seen.
Is it hairy?
It's like that big, right? It's white, but the underside of it is red, you know? And it stands up like this to show the red side of it, which is basically it telling you to get lost, because otherwise it's going to attack you. So we saw one, and everyone was like, whoa, that spider's so cool, look at it, look at it. No one knew how dangerous this thing was. If it bites you, you're done. Our snake guy came over, just scooped it up, and walked off with it. But the amazing thing is there was a kid in my school who was, I think, 2 years younger than me, that woke up one day and his leg was swollen like you can't believe. He was like, oh my God, what happened to my leg? Went to the hospital, they nearly had to amputate his leg, and they couldn't figure out what had happened, and they'd figured out eventually that a wandering spider had come to England in a load of bananas and bit him in London.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
The scene when in Spider-Man when Tony Stark goes in to like hug you and he opens the door. I'm wondering, like, was that scene filmed multiple times? Like, was it originally meant to be that joke about him like pretending it looked like he was hugging you?
Well, that was actually an improvised moment. You know, a lot of that scene was really entirely improvised. We kind of really riffed off each other. I'm trying to think how that actual gag came about. I think I just tried to hug him. I just thought it would be funny if I hugged him, and Robert's instincts are so good that he was like, oh, I'm not trying to hug you, I'm just gonna get the door. And then when we did it, you heard all the producers laugh behind Video Village, and then you were like, right, this is something that we should explore more. But that scene is so full of improvised moments and stuff that it's going to be a lot of fun.
I'm looking forward to it, man.
Thanks,
Tom,
man. Good to
always
see you.
good to see you,
See you,
buddy.
buddy.
I'm really happy for you. There's a great moment in the movie where you talk about childbirth, and it got the whole theater it was cheering when you said that line.
Did they cheer?
It's a great line.
Really?
Because you don't really think about it, because Charlie's character says to you that we're the same in mind but not in body, and then you mentioned that well, wait till you'll never know what it feels like to give birth to a child. So I'm wondering, when you say a line like that as a mom, is there something powerful about that moment for you as just an actress, but also as a person?
You know, there's something powerful about having a child, and in that moment realizing what your body is capable of versus what a man's body is capable of, and what a woman goes through to raise and to grow a human in their body and deliver a human to the earth. And women are not treated as equals to men, and it becomes, by the time I had a child, I had a sense of feminism. Once I gave birth to my daughter, I was just laughing. The world is insane because we are the superior species in many, many ways.
I agree.
I think that women can tolerate pain and endure pain for longer periods of time than men, yes. I think we're designed that way. That's why we have that role.
One thing I found fascinating is the time frames when Charlie's character is away from you and we're not seeing you on screen, but when he gets back, there's such an emotional weight to what you've been through in that time period. And I'm wondering, as an actress, do you build that in? Like, for example, if that's not in the script, do you build in what happened in those years for yourself? Like, do you have stories of how the kids grew up? Like, do you do that as an actress?
Yeah, you try to fill in as many blanks. I mean, in any film or any play, when I walk into a room, I imagine where I've come from. No one walks into the room with the same energy that they would if they'd just been standing outside waiting to come in. You know, you have to make the world around you as real as possible. And in this film, yes, the children were growing up, and there was a life going on. She was a suffragette. She was always working behind the scenes to find evidence to prove what her husband was searching for. And she was incredibly influential and important to his story. But she also wasn't just a wife. You know, there was something incredibly brave and dignified about how she accepted her role and fought against the things that were unjust, but was matriarchal and stoic, and I loved her.
One of the best lines you have in the movie is, "A man's reach should exceed his grasp." I thought that was a really cool. You were talking about Charlie's character, and I'm wondering, like, you know, as an actress, do you find yourself reaching for roles that you think you might not be able to do, and then you can, like, is that something that kind of drives you, and, like, is that the ones you want the most, the ones you feel like you can't pull off?
You know, I think I am drawn to challenging myself. I sometimes read scripts and I know exactly who they are, what it is, like it just lands. I am about to do 2 projects where I'm really reaching for it, and I don't quite know how I'm going to get there. And it's at this moment, it's really anxiety-inducing, but I'm sure immensely satisfying if it comes together.
Yeah.
And I think the challenging, that's what you search for, that adrenaline, something about that struggle is appealing to me.
And people were telling James he couldn't pull this film off, and he did. So
he did, and this film was not on the script. It was not on the page. It was a bit of a mess because it span. I was like, how are you going to cover this time period? How are you going to film the jump? And like, it doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
And he was like, it's in my head, trust me. I mean, that's an auteur.
Yep, that's cool. Well, it's so awesome. Nice to meet you.
Thanks.
Hope you have a wonderful rest of the weekend.